Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce's Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 5th of January 2024. Let's get to where we normally start, which is the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to this video below. There's quite a lot of content to get through, but I did do a breaking news video last night. If you want to check that out with some analysis I did alongside it with regard to the massive Ukrainian strikes on Russian targets inside occupied territories and inside Russia, and the news about the North Korean missiles being fired into Ukraine by the Russians and the ramifications thereof. Go and check that out. But for the time being, right, let's look at the loss stats. 790 Russian personnel claimed to have been lost yesterday. 9 tanks, 14 APVs. So that's fairly costly for the for the Russians, but not crazy bad. We've seen far worse than that in all those three categories. 30 artillery systems is a very high number for artillery systems lost in one day. So I think that is a good figure for the Ukrainians there. 2 multiple launch rocket systems and 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. We've seen over the last week a number of anti-aircraft warfare systems added to the list, where I think we had a few days of not seeing any. Now we're seeing 1, 2 on each, 1 or 2 on every single day at the moment. So I think that is a useful category for the Ukrainians over the last week. Then 40 vehicles and fuel tanks is a high number in that category, as well as 9 pieces of special equipment high there as well. So those 2 categories have been fairly problematic for the Russians over the last week. I would say 40 vehicles and fuel tanks lost in a single day means the logistics will have been somewhat degraded. So yeah, a useful day for the Ukrainians. Nothing that really shouts out. Although other than, I'd say, artillery systems, that is a good haul, 30 lost in a day. But of course, you know, how accurate are these figures, etc., etc. I hopefully show you that they are at least somewhat accurate. The trends are something to look out for. Right. Andrew Perpetua, in his tireless work, I don't know how this man finds the time in a day personally, and knowing how many different things he is doing. It's not just the mapping, but he's compiling so much data, although I think he has people helping him as well. But here we can see that it's one of those days where it approaches parity. You must be aware that 2 of those at the bottom are decoys, so effectively you can take them off in terms of they are not huge losses in degrading equipment. So yeah, somewhat more equipment lost by the Russians, but effectively parity. Let's then look at the value of that which has been lost. So a comms tower has been hit, boats has been sunk, probably a small dinghy on the Dnipro River, a single tank T-64, a single BMP-1 IFV, so not hugely costly in terms of the equipment so far. And then the rest are basically trucks, a couple of fuel tanks and some vans. And then the decoys at the bottom, the RST decoy, will check that out in a wee while. So I'd say that's not a great deal of losses. You basically a missile strike taking out almost all of that stuff, I would assume, in one fell swoop. Now, I have not seen that missile strike, but that's, as you can see there, a lot of destroyed equipment all in that one missile strike. So something has happened. I don't know whether they were being transported on a train, whether that's a base that's been hit. If any of you guys know, let me know. But if it wasn't for that one strike, I think there would be hardly anything lost. So that is a single very serious hit there. And then when we go to look at the Russian losses, we've got another air defense system, Estrella 10, Muron Muron M surveillance equipment, and a comms tower, and a Brem L recovery vehicle, all destroyed. A Tulpan, so that's a 240 millimeter self-propelled mortar. I can't get my words out. I think I've got the image of that, the video of that. That's quite a significant explosion, especially since the Gimlers. So it was a guided multiple launch rocket that hit that, but actually it wasn't a direct hit, but even without a direct hit, that thing went up. So that's an interesting bit of footage to look at in that respect. And then a number of tanks, including 2 T-90As. And I've got footage of that. I talked about that yesterday as well, but not in the loss video. And a few other tanks, quite a variety of tanks there. The T-90A is not the T-90M breakthrough tank, which is the most recent variant, their best tank, if you like. But it is, I guess, the second best tank. APC, a couple of IFVs, trucks, civilian vehicles and unknown vehicles that are so destroyed and you can't quite work out what they are. So I think that's a much higher value list of equipment that the Russians have lost, even though it looks like it's approaching parity. However, when it comes to logistics, you can see that, tankers and fuel tanks being lost all in one strike is a serious logistical headache for the Ukrainians. But I guess if you're going to say, would you prefer to lose some tankers rather than some tanks? I guess tankers will be easier to get hold of internationally rather than tanks. Like you can get 10 trucks, I think, from like Germany or Europe or something more easily than you can get 10 tanks. So I think that would be preferable. If you're going to lose a lot of stuff in one hit, I guess a bunch of logistics vehicles for Ukraine is going to be your preference. Right, when it comes to surveying videos and whatnot, books seem to be dropping like flies at the moment. There's lots of videos of these air defense systems going. There's one video with 3 books being lost. There's another video which is basically the same but has an OSA added onto it. So they are losing, it seems like the Russians are losing air defense systems. Now, more so than they were, say, a week ago. Here is the video of these 2 T-90 tanks that hadn't previously been seen. So Special Kherson Cat says, very interesting footage from Robotina area for several reasons. The use of the airburst FPV drone attack to attack a group of Russian infantry. So you've got 3 chaps running here. I won't play it any further on from this, but you get something dropped from a drone that is an airburst. So an airburst, normally you'd see airburst with artillery shells. So it is set that it explodes before it hits the ground. And as it explodes, it spreads all the shrapnel out. Rather than hitting the ground and needing the shrapnel to come off that ground explosion to spread, if it explodes before it hits the ground, you get a greater area of coverage of shrapnel, depending on what you have in the shell. And that airburst is very useful for taking out accumulated troops that might be in that area. Whereas if you have a single unitary impact, then it's much more focused in where it hits. So airburst can be really useful, but I've never seen it before from an FPV drone. So I don't know how they've done that, but they've obviously rigged up an IED that can airburst and takes out these chaps there. Then also of interest, 2 previously undocumented destroyed Russian T-90A tanks, which are quite rarely seen nowadays. Previously, T-90A losses were documented 4 months ago, so the last T-90A. We've seen a number of T-90Ms, and the question is, why are we seeing more T-90Ms and T-90As, and that's its own discussion. But anyway, you can throw that in there. You should be able to see all the things linked in my first 2 sections on. They are linked in the video description below, although there's quite a few that I've drafted out from last night, so it might be a bit chaotic in the links, but hopefully I've got everything for you. Now here's that explosion of the Tulip, the 240mm mortar that is hit by a Gimlers, and the Gimlers goes off over here, which is relatively close, but it's what's quite interesting how quickly this self-propelled mortar goes up, catches fire, and then it explodes big time. And it's really quite quick how a not supremely accurate Gimlers can cause fundamental damage to another piece of kit. Although they are designed, it is accepted that is still accurate. You don't have to hit these things dead on. You can hit nearby and it will do its damage. It depends what munition the rocket is loaded with, whether it has like tungsten ball bearings or tungsten fragments that fly out and then put holes everywhere and render bits of kit completely obsolete, or other forms of fragmentation or whatever. Anyway, over the past week, Ukrainian forces destroyed a pair of Russian 240mm heavy mortars operating around Donetsk. Seen below, a Russian 2S4 firing at Avdiivka cooks off after taking Ukrainian counter-battery fire. Now, German aid to Ukraine. I'm hoping to chat to him today. I don't know it'll be live. Last time he wanted it pre-recorded, just because some people aren't confident to talk live. I'm going to chat to him about the new Skynet system and German aid, and another chat about Taurus. Anyway, he's just said here, this video is supposed to show the destruction of an Iris-T SLM, so that's a medium-range and air defense system, launching in Kherson region. However, I'm 99% sure that this is a decoy, and I explain why. And indeed, Andrew Perpetu's noted this as a decoy on his list. Firstly, the same source published another video, probably at the same location, in which another decoy launcher can be seen quite clearly. Secondly, the containers housing the missiles are clearly hit. With 8 loaded containers, there would be a secondary explosion after the first impact, or at least a lot bigger explosion, which is missing here. There's also no video of what happened afterwards. Usually, if a video cuts out straight after something's been hit, you can pretty much guess that no big damage was done to the target. We see this quite often from both sides, no doubt, where you're catching a drone hit the tank or whatever it is, and then the video ends there. Whereas if that tank cooked off, that would be kept, the recording would be kept rolling. It wouldn't be cut, and you would see that cooking off, because that's what we see when they're a really successful hit. So usually means that the drone didn't do much damage, or it's a decoy, because there's not much damage done otherwise, or it doesn't cook off because it's a decoy, right? So there is also no video of what happens afterwards. That would be the first thing to show after all. The secondary explosion would be a dead giveaway. The decoy will probably not even have been on fire. Otherwise, they would have shown this to show at least something. Apart from that, the edges, especially the containers, are simply too perfect. So anyway, I'll probably get hit for showing you this, so I won't show you. But it is a decoy, decoy air defense system, an Iris-T, that has been hit by the Russians, so Ukrainian piece of kit. Right, Russia on fire. Krasnoyarsk aluminium plant belonging to Rusal on fire after a massive explosion. I don't know exactly where this is and what would have caused it, but if you're Ukrainian, this is the sort of thing you would want to see, which is a metal plant. Is it sabotage? Is it careless smoking? Is it an insurance job? Or is it a strike by Ukrainian drones or distance, long-range missile? I don't know. However, an explosion at an aluminium plant is going to be useful for the Ukrainians in terms of Russian production. Okay, now we're on to what could be a lengthy segment, but I'll try and keep it as short as possible. The first thing to note is that there was a wave of Russian drones against Ukraine last night. I don't know if it was a pre-planned one or whether it's in response to the previous Ukrainian wave of drones that happened earlier, both in the day and then in the early night time. Then the Russians hit back with their own drone wave, 29 drones, of which 21 were shot down. So that's 8 got through. Where those 8 got through, I don't know. So there could have been wide-scale damage to Ukrainian targets. Just not sure. They seem to be going more for industrial, defense manufacturing infrastructure rather than energy infrastructure or outright military targets at the moment. But who knows? You've got Staro-Konstantinov. I think there are explosions there, which is the airbase in Khmelnytsky district. I know Greg Terry was at Staro-Konstantinov yesterday. His main setup is in Khmelnytsky, the oblast. So Greg Terry from the Greg Terry Experience, we're working together on fundraising. Please go and check out the fundraising details that are on various videos or at Greg Terry Experience. I think approaching $130,000 worth of fundraising, which is absolutely phenomenal. More than that, actually, I think. So that fantastic. Anyway, I think there was a single 25 one. No, I won't go into that. I'll let him talk about that. Anyway, 21 out of 29 hits. Interceptions, and possibly a successful interception or at least explosions in Staro-Konstantinov last night. Right, that was on the back of a massive wave of Ukrainian missiles and drones. And I think what happened is the Ukrainians initially sent drones, and then, or at least in some of the places, you had a 3-stage attack from what I can gather. Drones, then S-200 or S-250, so those are the old surface-to-air missiles that have been repurposed to use in ground attack modes that Ukraine are now using. So it went drone, S-200, and then better missiles later on. So Storm Shadow, Neptune, whatever it was. And that 3-stage process will get the Russians to exhaust their air defense systems and missiles and magazines and whatever against the lower value drones and missiles, and then the high value missiles can then come through and hit. Anyway, it started with Sevastopol and some large explosions going on there, apparent missile strikes, so that might have been just outright missiles earlier on rather than the precursor attacks. Ukrainian missiles have struck a Russian base near Uyutne, Russian-occupied Crimea. Many ambulances have been requested. So that was a bit of information I didn't have yesterday in my breaking news video. The commander of the Ukrainian Air Forces then said this. Lieutenant General Mykola Oleshchuk said he commended his pilots for their impeccable combat work attacking Russian military targets in occupied Crimean cities of Sevastopol and Yevpatoria this afternoon. So I thought that was interesting that the person in charge then very publicly said they did a great job of hitting these targets. Why would you say that unless they succeeded? In other words, this is prima facie evidence that actually the Ukrainians did succeed. Then later on, and I didn't report on this, I don't think. I think this came out after my breaking news. Not much later, Ukrainian Stratcom confirmed it hit a Russian control and command post near Sevastopol, although unconfirmed there's strong signals of a radar system and an air defense complex being hit as well. So that was good. And then that commander, Oleshchuk, published on his own Telegram feed a snippet from a Soviet film in the zone of special attention. And the words spoken in the clip are, "The secret command post has been destroyed. Sorry, comrade general." In other words, he's very, not so cryptically, I guess, posting that clip, the inference being the implication, being very strongly that a secret command post has been destroyed. And we'll come back to that in a little while. Crimea's Sevastopol was hit, as mentioned. Then Kerch, Saki, Jankoy, Novorossiysk, and I did my breaking news focus on the fact that they are starting to hit Novorossiysk in Russia, which is the alternative to Sevastopol as far as a port for the Black Sea Fleet is concerned. Now that is under attack. We are moving to a different point in the war where Ukraine are able and managing to attack places within Russia. Yes, we have seen that within Russia before, but we haven't seen that in Novorossiysk. And I was going to do a whole video predicting that Novorossiysk will be target number 1 going forward. Because as soon as the Black Sea Fleet is moved from Sevastopol loses much of its importance. And that importance then shifts to Novorossiysk. Well, Ukraine is surely going to hit that. And they are starting to build their own indigenous missile and drone capability up so that they can hit that. Right. Rebar said its own stuff about that, saying that, everything was shot down and no problems, nothing to see here type thing, including, I think, the claim that 10, in total, Russian military personnel shot down 10 missiles, most of which were Storm Shadow missiles. Well, considering I don't think there's been a successful Storm Shadow missile being shot down yet, I know there was one that went off target and landed in a field. That was admitted even by Ben Wallace at the time. He said that I think Ben Wallace, when he was still Defence Minister, the Secretary of Defence in the UK, said Storm Shadows had almost universal success. In other words, he was pretty publicly saying at that point, and this is going back some months, of course, but at that point, not a single Storm Shadow had been shot down, and they were being used quite widely then. To then go to a point where somewhere near 10 Storm Shadow missiles are being shot down by by Russian air defenses, when we've just seen Storm Shadows get through in Feodosia and destroy an entire ship, right? is highly unlikely. So I think Rebar is doing a bit of serious PR here. As Ukraine Battle Map says, we know this is a lie. Storm Shadows don't fail at such a high rate, because then we heard 2 more Storm Shadow missiles passing around Cape Furlan, attempted to attack air defense units in Sevastopol. The missiles were not successfully shot down. Okay, so it's a mission that they didn't get shot down by air defenses, but they didn't reach their target as the military personnel of the 31st Division continued their work. In other words, we didn't shoot them down, but 2 of them failed. Well, we had only 1 failure out of a whole load, and it's unknown as to whether that was an outright failure or something changing in the targeting, so it was sent to its safe space, because we know that those missiles have that, as opposed to the Russian missiles that if something goes wrong, they just go and land there anyway, or it's close by, and it doesn't matter if it kills a bunch of people. A lot of NATO missiles have fail-safe, that if something goes wrong with the targeting, it then veers off and goes to a safe space, like a field, and then goes and hits a field, so that civilians don't die, because that's important. It's not so important for the Russians. So anyway, it seems highly unlikely that some of the scenarios presented by the Russian PR campaigns represent reality. So anyway, just to go through really quickly, we've got a number of places being hit. So let's just put this on a map for you. Jankoy, which is a logistics hub, really important, got an airbase, I think, as well, helicopter airbase there. Saki, which is an airbase. Yevpatoria, Sevastopol, obviously Yevpatoria for air defenses, Sevastopol for its naval infrastructure, but also air defenses there. Feodosia as a port, Kerch Bridge, but also ports around there. Novorossiysk as the Black Sea fleet home now. All of these places getting hammered by drones, missiles, surface to air missiles possibly being used in ground attack mode, and Neptune or cruise missiles, Storm Shadows, and similar. Novorossiysk air defenses were active, so things happened. There was a big explosion that shook windows, and that's unlikely to be an explosion in the air that's going to do that. The kind of explosions that shake windows are the ones that hit the ground. So it's very likely that something got through air defenses in Novorossiysk. Quite what we don't know. And there's not an awful lot of information coming out of any of these strikes at the moment. So unfortunately, there's not too much to add. There were S-400 sites that were identified a few days ago. S-400s are pretty much the best air defense systems that Russia has. These have been geolocated on satellite imagery and whatnot. If the Ukrainians are going to hit Novorossiysk, you can pretty much, I think, safely predict that they'll hit the air defense systems first. So that it could be, and I don't know whether that is a good use of cruise missiles or not. An S-400 air defense system being taken out by cruise missiles, usually you would use those are 2-stage broach warheads on top of in the Storm Shadows, so that they can explode on the outside, and then that explodes away, like building, concrete and whatnot, and then the secondary explosion happens inside. So these are bunker buster cruise missiles that are really good at taking out buildings and that kind of bridges and that kind of infrastructure, as opposed to something like a missile system. So I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were targeting S-400 systems on the outskirts of Novorossiysk, because then they can go again at Novorossiysk. And then this morning, round 2, an air alert announced in Sevastopol. Kerch Bridge was closed, so on and so forth. So that was this morning. And on top of that, Max 23 reporting Crimea, here we go again, 2.0, because Poseidon P8A is taken off, Challenger 650, and these are sort of planes that allow you a good radar picture of what's going on in an extended area, which you would put up if you're going to do further attacks on places. So again, you add these things together, it looks like another attack has taken place on possibly Sevastopol, Crimea, I don't know, somewhere in that region this morning. We'll see whether that is actually the case, I guess, as the day advances. Right. PS11 saying the result of a drone attack on a logistics base of one of the units of the 1st Tank Army of Russia. This is in the Shebekinsky district in Belgorod. So an image coming from Belgorod. This isn't This is probably from early yesterday or the day before, maybe. Let's have a look. Oh no, this is on the 1st of January, but this is imagery just coming out now. The main blow was inflicted on the territory of the fuel and lubricants warehouse. From there, the fire quickly spread to a neighbouring building where the Ural Gaz 866 was being repaired. As a result of the impact, several vehicles burned completely. 8 servicemen who were in the fuel and lubricant warehouse received burns of varying degrees and severity. At least one of the injured died in the hospital. So that was a hit in Belgorod on the 1st. Now, going back to the hits from yesterday. So talking about that secret HQ command and control base that was hit. And we had the announcements from Elishchuk on Telegram and a clip of that film. You piece together some of these things and then hear some of the rumors. So this rumor was going around last night and continues at the moment. So so take it with a massive block of salt. But Dead District here says Gerasimov, chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces and first deputy defense minister, was allegedly killed in a Ukrainian missile attack in occupied Crimea. We are waiting for confirmation. I would give it a low probability of actually being true, but there are various claims about bases being hit. So pro-Russian channels confirmed that in yesterday's strike against the Russian airbase in Saki, around 23 Russian soldiers were killed, among them 5 high-ranking members and 9 from the special forces. The same channels complain that the Russian air defense in the Russian-occupied peninsula has been severely degraded, enabling more strike of that kind in the future. You'll find that, as I talked about the other day, this vicious cycle happens that you degrade the air defense capabilities, then it allows you to do more, and then that continued degradation allows you to do more, and then eventually it's just open season. This is why it's so important to do suppression of enemy air defense. In fact, that's what Russia didn't do effectively at the beginning of the war, which means that they're in this pickle they're in now. Had they been much more effective had they thought this was going to be a war rather than a special military operation, and had they predicted that the Ukrainians would, fight back rather than roll over and say, yeah, you can change our government, which is what they planned for. So they did a very limited suppression of enemy air defense precursor, and then they kind of flew helicopters in to drop people off, and it all went wrong. It turned into a war. But what they really should have done is predicted it would have been a war, and then done, say, 2 months of suppression of enemy air defenses or destruction of enemy air defense activity. Stuff like this that then allows you free reign to use. You get air superiority, and then you can do what you like. Basically, it's somewhat easier going forward. But without that, turned into a nightmare for the Russians. Now, what the Ukrainians are doing is that, and they're doing that to Crimea, not so that they can then land their troops and waltz into Crimea, but then so they can just absolutely muller all these other targets within Crimea. It's what I said about Novorossiysk. I'm pretty sure they'll be hitting the S-400 systems, because once they take out the air defenses around Novorossiysk, hey, we can just hammer the heck out of those ships that are sitting ducks in port. So that's what's going on with Crimea at the moment. So when we talk about this stasis on the front line and we get worried about, oh my goodness, the Russian army have moved 400 meters this way in that place and 300 meters that way in that other place. Yeah, okay. The important stuff is happening in strikes like this. Now, it's not to say that the Ukrainians aren't suffering, because the Russians are hitting Ukrainian infrastructure, but I think the Russians are not very good at target acquisition. And because I don't think they have particularly good intelligence, and their satellite imagery is not as good as the Ukrainians, qua the Ukrainian allies. So what NATO are doing consistently for Ukraine, that goes on day in, day out, is providing intel. And that intelligence is phenomenal. And that's why those planes going up that I just talked about in the international airspaces around the edges of the Black Sea, Romania and places like that, is super important. Why the satellites, they're super important, because they are providing Ukraine with real-time information, time-sensitive data about targets to hit. And then Ukraine go, thank you very much, we're going to hit that with this weaponry. Bish bash bosh, there you go. The Russians, on the other hand, if you look at what they're doing, most of their stuff, like last year, it was energy infrastructure rather than military targets. And this year, it's defense industrial military capacity rather than military targets. Now, I said there's a good bit of targeting. They do need to do that, but they also really need to hit military targets. Now, the airbase in Starokonstantiniv is one that they're going to continue to hit, as well as air bases in Kryvyi Rih and places like that. However, those aren't time-sensitive targets. So when they do hit military targets, they generally are hitting them. I mean, they will occasionally get some time-sensitive stuff as well, but they aren't hitting HIMARS. They aren't hitting stuff that is moving around. Like, it doesn't seem like they're hitting Patriot air defense systems. They are taking out stuff. You know, they're aiming for targets that they know is going to be there because they've been there for decades because it's a freaking big airbase, right? That's what they're going for. And I think there's a really big difference there. And Ukraine have that. There's an asymmetry there that Ukraine can eke out an advantage with. And that will translate into Crimea, Novorossiysk, eventually being open season when all those air defense systems are eventually completely attrited. And they're getting there. You know, Ukraine are having more and more success in striking targets within Crimea, and as you can see, that's stretched now to Novorossiysk. Right, on other bits and pieces here, Igor Sushko says Russia's reliance on Western technology in every sector exposed. 3 passenger trains broke down with people trapped in freezing temperatures for hours across the country in just the past 2 days. Russia's not self-sufficient in anything. Let's close the sanctions loopholes. Interesting that what we're seeing happening with the aviation industry could be happening with trains as well. We know that ball bearings are an issue for Russia. Many of the ball bearings manufacturers are in NATO countries or places like Sweden. Sweden's a big one, which is soon to be a NATO country, but sanctioned straight away. Ball bearings were unable to be transported to Russia from the normal sources, and that meant things like rolling stock carriages and whatnot going forward. There was supposedly, I mean, I haven't heard too much for some time on this, but there were supposedly some real logistics issues for the Russian train services, so on and so forth. That is another issue for the Russians, especially given the very cold temperatures. So Moscow was minus 27. We here in Kiev at the moment, we're in sort of minus 8 or something at the moment. That it is cold. There's a cold snap hitting Ukraine, and that might have some effect on frontline activities. Okay, something else here from St. Petersburg to the trenches in Sinkivka. So that's in the northeastern sector right up. In fact, there is news out from the Daily Telegraph today that Sinkivka area, Kupiansk, the Russians are getting ready for a big offensive in the Kupiansk direction in that Kharkiv Oblast. So, yeah, somewhere to look out for. A commander in his unit tells a story of how he surrendered with his men near Sinkivka. He was supposed to be the rear, but when he complained about the lack of vacations, he was sent to storm Sinkivka, the theatre of epic battles. Without food and water, he ate snow. A lot of dead Russians and units completely decimated. So all the information from that, I mean, it's a 5-minute interview, a 5-minute monologue there. So yeah, I'm not going to go through it, but a lot of data, of course, take it with a pinch of salt, but it seems like things aren't going well for the Russians. This is a common problem we see across the front line, but it's overcome generally by the Russians because they have this culture of fear. And so even if you are feeling like that, and even if you are experiencing terrible hardships and you're eating snow to get your water because you don't have water and so on and so forth, and you're surrounded by dead Russians, you still go about your business of fighting for Russia because the options are you get shot by your own people, or you get put in a hole in the ground, or in a detention facility, or something else. And you don't surrender because, as we keep hearing from intercepts and from interviews with these people that do eventually surrender, they don't do it earlier because they are told and they believe that they will get horrendously tortured by the Ukro-Nazis, etc., etc. All these claims find purchase with the Russian soldiers themselves, and so therefore, you know, where you would expect them living in these horrendous conditions, operating in these horrendous conditions, you would expect them to give up and just say, right, I'm going to go and get captured. At least I'll be given warm food and be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. They don't do that because they think precisely the opposite will happen. They'll be either executed by the Ukrainians or tortured. And so these situations maintain. Okay, Finally, I'm pretty sure that citizens in Russian-occupied Crimea never ever would have agreed upon that their residential buildings would be used as an observation post armed with machine guns. But the pro-Ukrainian citizens send us pictures to let us know what is going on there. This is Yevpatoria. So Yevpatoria, some of these seaside places that are getting hit, and you're thinking, why is this residential building being hit or whatever? Well, there's a machine gun post in that residential building that pretty much tells you that it is not necessarily just a residential building. In fact, when there are these kind of holiday complexes as well on the seaside, you can rest assured they ain't being used as holiday destinations right near. The Crimea is a little bit different, but some of the places in Kherson, up near Henichesk, that they are being used as barracks, as billeting for officers and whatnot. So that's why they get consistently hit. Anyway, goodness, thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. It's really important. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, haven't pressed that bell and select all as well, it's just, please, can you? My channel hasn't really grown at all in months. It's probably because, hey, not everyone likes what I do. But if you do like it, press the bell and that kind of stuff. Take care. Speak soon.